So we've talked about the Gothic elements, and we've talked about rhetoric and language, and we've talked about the senses, and we've talked about this novel as being kind of a reaction, as most Gothic fiction is, against sort of the prevailing epistemology of the 18th century. Let's talk a little bit about Carwin, this novel, but particularly its chief villain, as precursor, particularly, again, in American literature. And I want you to think about Carwin as roughly drawn as he is, and as inconsistently drawn as he is. I mean, he's not the most compelling villain, for heaven's sakes. However, he is, I would argue, the precursor of a number of sort of main character villains that you see throughout American literature, and the list can go on for quite some time. Chillingsworth in Scarlet Letter, Ahab in Moby Dick, a number of Poe's narrators or characters, and I'm thinking particularly about the Telltale Heart and some of the other characters or narrators that Poe gives us that are unreliable. And even somebody like Gatsby. Oh, I know, Leonardo DiCaprio, but still, he is kind of a dark figure, isn't he? And what do I mean by dark figure? Well, I mean, these are very different than the kinds of characters that you see in other literature. I mean, I defy you to find similar. Hey, outside of outside of Wuthering Heights, for example. Okay, you really don't see, which is, by the way, also a Gothic and romantic fiction work of fiction. You really don't see in British literature what you see in American literature, and that's these same or very similar types of sort of villain figures who we kind of almost want to sympathize with in a way. Now, you notice I use a lot of qualifiers there. Kind of, sort of, almost, right? I didn't say we sympathize with them. But it's hard to see Jay Gatsby, okay, as anything other than a really manipulative person who is an incredibly selfish person, a very hollow and sad person, but at the same time, someone who's not a good guy. Ahab, same thing, right? If you've read Moby Dick, you know that. And even Chillingsworth. By the way, that's Bob Duvall down there. I couldn't believe Robert Duvall is Chillingsworth. That was a horrible remake of it with Demi Moore. Anyway, and on and on and on. What do these characters represent? Well, it's almost become a kind of character type, this kind of dark-driven villain. It's not a villain who likes evil for evil's sake. It's the kind of villain who does things, A, because he can, B, because he's testing the limits of his abilities, and C, because he's driven on a quest for something no matter how dark that thing may be. In Ahab's case, he loses his leg to a whale. And I won't go into all of Moby Dick, but the fact is that he's driven to go and get this whale, because what he's doing is he's projecting all of the bad things that ever happened to him onto this dumb whale, right? And he also is driven because he can't believe that something as intelligent as himself could be nearly destroyed, ultimately he is, by what he would consider to be a dumb creature. And he has to get at the whale because the whale is a kind of a quest, a metaphysical quest, to deal with the issue of man's vulnerability and our susceptibility to evil. Jay Gatsby, for example, never fully accepted. Because of his background, because of I won't ruin the novels for you as best I can, but he's driven towards this success. It's this monomaniacal quest to achieve something that even if you were to get it, it would still leave you feeling empty, just as it does with Gatsby. Chillingsworth and some of Poe's characters, this sort of imp of the perverse. I can do this and I can torture another person because I have that kind of power. I have that ability to do it. Why do it? Just because it's like scratching an itch that never goes away. And in the Telltale Heart, it's clearly behavior on the part of an unbalanced figure. So these are not villains who are, mustache twirling, I'm just a bad guy because I'm a selfish guy. There's something deeper to these types of characters, is what I'm saying. And they run all throughout American literature. And when you find one, you say to yourself, there's something there. Because it's not just villainy. It's villainy wrapped up with ambition, with a mission, with a quest, and a radical sense of individualism. What can I not do? I'm capable of doing almost anything. If I'm genius enough, I can become the richest guy like Jay Gatsby. If I'm driven enough and I feel moral enough to go and right the moral wrong of adultery, I can, like Chillingsworth, I can really inflict a lot of suffering and punishment on someone. If I am smart enough and clever enough, maybe I can get away with murder like Poe's character. Whatever it is, you see, that radical individualism is there. And you see it here in Carwin. Carwin can't ever give you a good reason for why he's doing what he's doing, other than just, I can. And I can't help myself. I have to do this. Oh, he makes up some gobbledygook about I've been persecuted by some enemy who's chasing me around the countryside and all this kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, like Iago in Shakespeare's Othello, you just can't believe that this is the real motivation. Or you don't know what the real motivation is, other than just, I'm that deadgum clever. And I want to be able to manipulate people because it makes me feel as though I'm more than merely human. The moral ambiguity of these characters. Ahab thinks he's doing right, but he's destroying himself and other people. Jay Gatsby thinks he's living the American dream, playing by the rules, making money. Well, he's a rum runner. He's breaking the law every chance he gets. And so on and so forth. The narcissism that's inherent with these characters also. This all-consuming me, right? It's all about them. They're almost sociopathic in that way. But now, before you dismiss them and say, oh, they're terrible, they're self-absorbed, all these things, yes, all that is true. But they don't succeed in being truly great and successful villains without being charismatic. Every one of them is charismatic. Every one of them is a good talker or has the kind of seeming moral presence that when he steps out onto the deck of the ship and that peg leg is thumping along, everyone stops and listens and sees there's the great Ahab. When he enters the party in his tuxedo holding up the champagne glass, there he is, everyone says, yeah, that's Jay Gatsby. What a guy, right? And Chillingsworth, even with his sort of constant nagging moralism and so on and so forth, has a sort of persuasive charisma, a sort of character that says, follow me, I know what I'm doing. Follow me, I have the answers. And deep down inside, they don't. Now, this is a particular type of villain, like I said, that like Carwin. Now, Carwin is a dark figure. Oh, and there's a couple of other things. Of course, they're outsiders. They're almost always outsiders who are never fully integrated, never fully able to bond with other people, never capable of that. Carwin isn't either. Everything from the fact that he has some mysterious things in his past, that he's converted to Roman Catholicism, that he's spent some time in Spain, that he's probably been on the other side of the law, and so on and so forth. But almost all of them also have some sort of attractiveness to them. Sometimes it's a sexual attractiveness. Sometimes it's merely just the magnetic nature of their personality. Here's one passage in particular. If I can find the chapter here, it is in chapter 6, where we get this description, right? He almost has all the characteristics of the dark, sentimental seduction novel hero, right? And there's a bad vibe from this guy, which simultaneously, if you read between the lines, is also somewhat attractive. Yes, it's true that he says that he was planning on violating her sexually. If that's true, don't know, right? It could be that he just simply needed to say that to give a reason for why he was actually hiding in the closet, which was to essentially use this biloquism gift to manipulate people for his own entertainment. Would he actually have raped her? Well, he could have, and he didn't. So maybe he was just lying about that too. Maybe everything is about him is a total lie and a total fabrication. Just like Jay Gatsby, right? He invents his identity as he goes. But this one passage is really interesting because this is where Clara first really takes a close look at him. And I want you to think about this very carefully. And yet his forehead, so far as shaggy locks would allow it to be seen, his eyes lustrously black and possessing in the midst of haggardness, a radiance inexpressibly serene and potent, and something in the rest of his features which it would be in vain to describe, but which served to betoken a mind of the highest order, were essential ingredients in the portrait. This, in the effects which immediately followed, and in the effects which immediately flowed from it, I count among the most extraordinary incidents of my life. He had a very striking sort of appearance to him, right? But look, he's earthy. He's animalistic. he's almost described in sort of, be careful now, erotic terms. He's dark, his lustrous black eyes, potent, serene, smart, imposing, right? All those things. He strikes. Now, she's in love with Plyle. Yes, she's got a crush on Plyle. But what novel with a female character back in this time that is obviously tapping into the sentimental seduction tradition couldn't give us, or wouldn't give us, this I'm torn between two fellas kind of scenario? He can't be open about it. Carwin is a villain. But how many bad boys have heroines fallen in love with or couldn't make up her mind about? I mean, the Twilight series, I'm just putting it out there, okay? Which bad boy do I like best, you see? That's part of it. He's tapping into the sentimental seduction tradition in that. Obviously, this is a villain character, but even the villain characters have a certain type of sexual magnetism to them. Even though she's repulsed by him, she's also drawn and fascinated towards him because of his sexual magnetism. He's dangerous, and that is sexy beyond imagination, okay? To some people. Anyway, I want you to see that Jay Gatsby is. I don't think Ahab or Chillingsworth are. Nah, not really. But sometimes in some of these characters you see that, and it comes through loud and clear. You see it in some of the westerns in American film. You see it in a lot of different cases, that the villain is actually a rather erotic fellow, right? So what I'm going to invite you to do is you go and read some more, especially as we read through other works of fiction in the 19th century and so on, not in this class, but perhaps in another, is to bear that in mind. Carwin's back there. He's the earliest, in my view. He's the fella who first comes on the stage as a truly unique kind of villain who has some things in his DNA that'll pop up later on. And if you're wise enough and you're perceptive enough as you read later American novels or short stories, you'll see a little bit of Carwin's DNA in some of these characters as well. That's part of the legacy as well of the Gothic in American fiction.